The sky hung heavy with gray, as if the clouds themselves mourned alongside us. I stepped out of the black sedan in full dress uniform, the polished medals on my chest glinting briefly under the sullen Virginia light. Jasper stood beside me silent, his hands clenched inside the pockets of his navy suit. The small chapel that had once held our mother's funeral now welcomed another Harwood, our father. Inside, the air was stale with lilies and politeness. Corinne stood at the front, dressed in a sleek black dress, her expression poised behind a veil of tears that never quite reached her eyes. Her daughter Whit hovered behind her like a shadow in designer heels. I didn't approach them. I didn't need to. When the service ended, Corinne came to us, her heels clicking sharply across the stone steps. A few remaining guests lingered awkwardly nearby. "I'll make this brief," she said, brushing non-existent dust from her sleeves. "Marlin updated his will before he passed. The mansion and the assets, they belong to me and Whit now." Jasper stiffened beside me. "You're lying," he muttered. Corinne smiled, thin, practiced. "If you have questions, I suggest you speak to our attorney. But in the meantime, you're no longer welcome at the estate. Not today. Not any day." She handed me a sealed envelope, no doubt another legal brush-off. Behind her, 2 uniformed private security guards stood at the church gate, already waiting. I didn't say a word. I simply nodded once, folded the envelope and slipped it into my coat. Jasper looked at me, searching my face for fury or protest. He found neither. Instead, I smiled, because Corinne Vale had no idea what Marlin Harwood had done before the end. I used to believe that a house could hold memory the way old books held scent. The Harwood estate sat on a rise just outside Charlottesville, a long gray structure surrounded by pines that whistled in the winter and shaded the porch in July. It wasn't just real estate. It was where I learned the shape of love. My mother Mara filled the halls with her voice, soft, full of poems and bedtime stories and quiet songs she hummed while folding laundry. She had been a literature professor once, but she gave that up to raise us. I remember her reading Whitman aloud by the fireplace, Jasper curled into her side, with eyes wide, and me leaning on the opposite armrest, pretending not to listen but memorizing every word. She taught with warmth, never pressure. "A man isn't made by what he does," she'd say, "but by what he notices, what he forgives." She'd plant roses in the garden while telling Jasper fairy tales, and always managed to make you feel like you were her favorite person in the world, even when we both knew she loved all of us equally. My father Marlin was the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. He believed in discipline, in earned respect, in making things last. He ran his investment firm with quiet iron efficiency, but at home he was gentler. Every Sunday morning, he read the newspaper at the oak table while I recited headlines I didn't understand, and he'd correct my posture with one hand while passing Jasper a slice of buttered toast with the other. Though Jasper was 15 years younger, he and I were bound in ways I still can't explain. Maybe it was how he watched me trusting quiet, always trying to keep up. I used to carry him on my shoulders through the garden, letting him fly through Mom's roses. He called me his giant. I never told him how much I needed that, too. The house felt invincible back then. Every hallway knew our names. Every picture on the walls had a heartbeat behind it. It never occurred to me that something so full of warmth could go cold without making a sound. But it did, and the silence came quicker than I expected. I was 21 when the call came. We'd just finished drills at West Point, and my boots were still caked in mud when my commanding officer pulled me aside, his face tighter than usual. "You need to call home Harwood," he said. Now, I knew before I picked up the phone. Knew it in the way my chest sank and the edges of the world narrowed. Jasper's voice came through the line, trembling. "Lucas, it's Mom. She's gone." A truck had run a red light on the edge of town. She was on her way home from picking up art supplies for Jasper. Just one more errand, one more ordinary thing. The plane ride back was a blur. I don't remember the gate, the drive, or who met me at the airport. I remember the house, though, the way it felt when I stepped inside. It was quiet but not peaceful. The kind of silence that presses against your chest like a weight. Jasper ran to me, burying himself in my coat. "She's not coming back, is she?" he asked. I couldn't speak. I just held him tighter. Dad sat in the great room alone, staring out the window as if he were still waiting for her car to pull in. He didn't cry, just held the silk scarf she always wore, turning it over in his hands like he could summon her back through touch. I tried to speak to him, to reach him, but he just nodded, offered vague responses, and sank further into work in the weeks that followed. I returned to the academy, but every phone call home was shorter. Jasper sounded smaller with each one. He stopped drawing, stopped laughing. He'd ask if I thought Mom was watching us, and I'd lie and say yes. Not because I believed it, but because he needed it. Eventually, we both learned to live with the ache. It became a rhythm, a dull echo in the background. Holidays grew quieter. Dad buried himself in boardrooms and closed doors. Jasper clung to memories I couldn't always be there to reinforce. And the house, once so full of life, started to feel like a museum of someone else's joy. It was 2 years later when Dad told us he was getting remarried. Dad told us at dinner with a glass of wine in his hand and a strained smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Her name is Corinne," he said. "She's been a comfort these past few months. I've decided to marry her." Jasper looked at me, waiting for my reaction. I said nothing. The words sat in my throat like stones. It wasn't that I didn't want Dad to find companionship. It was that he spoke of Mom like a chapter that had already been closed and shelved. Corinne Vale arrived with expensive perfume glossy hair and a kind of grace that never felt warm. She moved through the house like someone inspecting a property more than joining a family. Her daughter Whit came 214 and already full of practiced smirks. She walked through the rooms like she was scouting for territory. Within weeks, the house began to change. The rose bushes Mom had planted were replaced with glass sculptures. The worn family photos vanished from the mantel, replaced by modern black and white frames of Corinne and Whit. The living room was repainted, the library reclassified. Every change was explained as refreshing the energy, but it felt more like an erasure. Corinne took over everything: the house, the staff, the dinner table conversations. She planned events with Dad's colleagues, but never invited his oldest friends. One by one, they stopped calling. He said they were busy. I knew better. Jasper kept his distance, spending more time in his room sketching things he never showed me. When I asked, he just shrugged. "Doesn't feel like home anymore," he whispered one night. I tried to give Corinne the benefit of the doubt, told myself she was just trying to make her place. But I watched the way she looked at Jasper like he was a problem that hadn't been solved yet. And Whit. She made comments at dinner, jabs cloaked as jokes, about Jasper's drawings, about his quietness, about his place in this big house. Dad didn't notice, or maybe he chose not to. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that she was adjusting, that we were all still grieving in our own ways. But the first time Jasper cried and said he felt like a guest in his own home, I knew something deeper had already shifted. It started with whispers, little cuts that bled slowly. Corinne would make remarks about Jasper's sensitive nature, or ask why he didn't play sports like other boys. At first it was easy to brush off. I told myself she didn't know better, that she didn't understand him. But then came the night Jasper called me, his voice breaking. "She tore it up," he said. "The drawing I made for Mom." I flew home the next day, arriving just past midnight. He showed me the shredded pieces still on the floor of his bedroom, like proof of a crime no one else wanted to acknowledge. It was a watercolor of the pine trees behind the house, just like the ones Mom used to read beneath. She laughed, he whispered, said it looked like a child's scribble. My blood ran cold. In the living room, Corinne was seated with a glass of wine and a magazine. I didn't ask for pleasantries. "You don't touch his things," I said. My voice didn't shake, but my hands did. She looked up slowly, crossing her legs. "Lucas, let's not be dramatic. He's too old to be babied." Jasper stood in the doorway, silent. Dad sat in the adjacent study fully within earshot, but he didn't look up. He just turned another page. I waited. For a word, a glance, anything from him, but nothing came. That night Jasper and I packed his things. I had already found a boarding school in Vermont months ago, a quiet place with an art program and counselors who understood grief. I had held back hoping I wouldn't need it. When we reached the front door, Dad appeared. His eyes were tired and his tie was loosened like he'd been about to say something for hours, but never found the start. "Where are you taking him?" he asked. "Somewhere safe," I said. He didn't stop us, didn't fight, just nodded and stepped aside. As we pulled away from the house, Jasper looked out the window silent. I kept my eyes on the road, hands tight on the wheel. Behind us, the house stood in perfect order just as Corinne liked it, and Dad, as always, stayed behind the glass. The call came on a rainy Tuesday. I was reviewing training schedules at the base when my personal phone rang a number I hadn't seen in years. Grady Sloan, my father's longtime attorney. "Lucas," he said, his voice low, too steady. "It's your father. Stage 4. It's bad. You should come now." I didn't ask for details. I booked the earliest flight I could, drove straight from the airport to the estate. The gate was closed, taller than I remembered, cold iron cutting across the driveway like a warning. 2 security guards I didn't recognize stood behind it. Corinne appeared not long after stepping onto the porch, as if she'd been expecting me. "He's not seeing visitors," she said before I could speak. "Doctor's orders. He needs rest. I'm his son." I know, she said, her voice soft but tight. "But right now that doesn't matter." I stepped closer to the gate, gripping the bars. "I'm not leaving." She nodded toward the guards. "Then you'll wait outside." I walked back to my car, hands shaking, and called the police. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. One older, one young, both polite but firm. I explained everything. Showed ID. Explained I wasn't just a visitor, I was family. They spoke to Corinne, and after a few minutes she relented with a sigh so rehearsed it could have been theater. 5 minutes, she said, stepping aside. The master bedroom was dim. Machines beeped gently. My father looked smaller than I remembered, sunken into the mattress like the weight of his own body had betrayed him. I knelt beside him, unsure what to say. He opened his eyes slowly, and for a moment they cleared. "Lucas," he rasped, barely audible. I took his hand. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I tried to protect you boys. I wanted to ask how. Ask why he hadn't done more, said more, been more. But the words stuck in my throat. His eyes drifted shut again. My 5 minutes were up. Outside, Corinne waited. "That's enough," she said quietly. The officers nodded and stepped aside. I walked out without a word. That night I sat in my car under the darkening sky, the house glowing behind me like it belonged to someone else. The funeral was held in the same chapel where we'd buried Mom. Same quiet pews, same scent of lilies curling into the wood. Jasper sat beside me, stiff in his black suit, his hands cold despite the late spring warmth. Corinne played the part of the grieving widow, with precision, dabbing her eyes, nodding solemnly, keeping close to Whit, who bowed her head and pretended to mourn a man she barely spoke to. I kept my eyes on the casket. It didn't feel real, not because I hadn't grieved already, but because something about the way it ended, the forced goodbye, the guards, the gate, felt wrong. Forced, designed. After the service, Corinne gathered a small group of family and friends just outside the chapel steps. Mr. Sloan wasn't there. That struck me first. She cleared her throat, folding a black folder in her arms like it was a treasured heirloom. "As you all know, Marlon made arrangements before his passing," she said. "He updated his will in accordance with his wishes. I want to be transparent with you all. Everything, including the Harwood estate and assets, was left to me and Whit." Jasper flinched. "That's not possible," he whispered, his voice raw. She pulled out a copy of the will, sealed and notarized. "It's all here. Signed. Official. I want to make sure there's no confusion." He stepped forward, face pale. He wouldn't do that. Corinne looked at him with something that almost resembled sympathy. Grief clouds judgment, I understand. But Marlin wanted stability, simplicity. You two have your own lives now. I said nothing, just looked at the paper, then at her. Jasper turned to me, his eyes wide, searching. Lucas, I put a hand on his shoulder. We'll see, I said. Corinne blinked, caught off guard by the calm in my voice. She had expected outrage, anger, maybe even tears, but not stillness, not the smile I gave her as I turned away, Jasper beside me, his shoulders trembling, not the certainty I carried quietly as we walked back to the car. It had been late fall, just a few months before everything turned. Dad and I were sitting in his study, the only room in the house Corinne hadn't touched. The fire was low, casting uneven shadows on the bookshelves. He looked tired, thinner than usual, but his eyes were sharp that night, clearer than I'd seen in years. He poured 2 glasses of scotch, passed one to me without a word. After a long silence, he said, I've made arrangements. Quiet ones. I didn't respond, just let him keep going. There's a trust, not the formal will. This one's separate, protected, for you and Jasper. In case something ever happens to me, or if someone tries to rewrite what belongs to you. I looked at him then, and he held my gaze. She's clever, he added, but I've watched you longer than she's known me. You'll know when to act. That night stayed with me like a note, folded and tucked deep in my jacket. I didn't tell Jasper. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I knew grief made people fragile, and he didn't need hope he couldn't hold yet. So I waited. Waited through Dad's decline, through Corinne's performance, through the funeral and the forged sympathy. Waited until she stood on those church steps and announced to the world that we had nothing. She didn't see it the way my silence wasn't surrender, because that smile I gave her, that was the moment I remembered everything he'd said, and the moment I knew exactly where to begin. The next morning I called Grady Sloan. Grady met me in a quiet corner booth of a cafe we used to frequent when I was a teenager. He looked older than I remembered, but his handshake was still firm. She cut me out, he said without preamble. Right after the diagnosis, claimed Marlin wanted a more streamlined legal team. I knew something was off, but he stopped returning my calls. I told him everything, the will, the announcement, the sudden control Corinne had taken. He listened, nodding slowly, jaw tight. I may not have access to the full files anymore, he said, but I know where Marlin kept digital backups. He was too cautious not to. A week later, Grady called me from his office. I found it, he said. The USB arrived in a sealed envelope tucked beneath layers of old contracts and scanned ledgers. On it, a notarized trust dated 6 months before the revised will. It left the estate, the mansion, liquid assets, everything to Jasper and me. Corinne was listed only as a temporary beneficiary, granted a modest living stipend. It wasn't ambiguous. It was intentional. Grady and I built the case slowly, carefully. We found a nurse from Dad's care team willing to speak off record. She remembered Corinne sitting beside his bed, coaching him through forms. Said he was barely awake, disoriented. The signature on the new will sloppy, hesitant. We had motive, timeline, and evidence. What we didn't have yet was the courtroom. But it was coming. Jasper sat quietly when I told him the plan. When I showed him the trust, he ran his fingers over Dad's name like he was touching something sacred. You sure we can do this? He asked. I nodded. We're not just doing it for us. And then I called the firm handling Corinne's version of the will. The courtroom was smaller than I imagined, plain walls and old carpet, but the air inside carried weight. Jasper sat beside me, fingers laced tightly in his lap. Across from us, Corinne wore a sleek black suit, face calm, perfectly painted. Wit didn't bother pretending, her glare never left me. Grady stood to present the trust, laying out every detail with precision. The dates, the signatures, the witness statements. Then came the nurse's testimony. She described Dad's state when the new will was signed, confused, heavily medicated, barely able to speak. The courtroom was silent as she finished. A forensic handwriting expert took the stand. He compared Dad's signature on both documents. One was strong, clean, consistent. The other hesitant, uneven. Likely signed under duress, he said. Possibly not of sound mind. Corinne didn't flinch, but her fingers tightened on the edge of her table. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't talk about law. I spoke about legacy, about a home built on love, not manipulation, about a father who may have made mistakes, but tried quietly, deliberately to make it right. The judge took a recess. Jasper and I sat in silence, neither of us speaking. When she returned, her ruling was direct. The revised will was void. The trust was valid and enforceable. The estate was ours. Corinne stood, didn't speak, didn't protest. She gathered her bag, straightened her jacket, and walked out. Whit followed, eyes hard but uncertain. We didn't celebrate, just stood in the quiet after they left, letting the weight of it settle. Jasper looked at me, eyes glassy, and I felt the knot in my chest loosen. We didn't win something. We had taken it back. The next morning we returned to the mansion. We stood at the edge of the garden where Mom's roses once grew. The soil was dry, but I could still picture her there, kneeling, humming, hands covered in earth. Jasper knelt beside the new wall paintbrush in hand, bringing a forest to life across the concrete. His lines were careful, deliberate, full of color and memory. We never talked about moving in. Neither of us wanted it. The house had been ours once, but it wasn't meant to be a shrine. It had to become something more. We turned it into the Harwood House, a non-profit for kids who'd never had safe places to land. Art programs, reading corners, mentorship, leadership training. We funded it with the estate, not to reclaim power but to give it away. I ran workshops with teens from the neighborhood, teaching them things I'd learned in the Army focus, discipline, resilience. Jasper taught art on Saturdays. His students painted next to him barefoot in the grass. We didn't fill the house with new furniture or noise. We filled it with purpose, with echoes of everything our parents stood for. And as the sun fell through the pines again, I finally felt like we'd come home.